You don't get irritated because someone is rude, or because the world is unfair, or because everything seems to go wrong only for you. The truth, which almost no one has the courage to face, is that irritation lives inside, not outside. And what the Stoics discovered over 2,000 years ago can completely change the way you deal with it. It's not magic, and it's not cheap self-help. It's a secret as simple as it is overlooked. The key isn't in changing people, but in changing what happens before your reaction. If you've ever regretted snapping at someone, if you feel like you're constantly on edge with everything and everyone, or if you're just tired of carrying this tension all the time, listen up. There's a solution. And it doesn't require years of therapy or becoming a monk in the Himalayas. The Stoic secret is practical, direct, and can start working today, even within the next few minutes. But here's the warning. Once you understand this, you'll have no more excuses to keep reacting the way you used to. In this video, you'll discover what the greatest minds in history already knew about anger, and why mastering it can be the difference between living drained or living in peace every single day. Anger never arrives screaming. It sneaks in like it's nothing, subtle, like a soft breeze that suddenly turns into a storm. The moment someone cuts you off in traffic or gives you a rude reply, your heart races, your face gets hot, and boom, the volcano awakens. But Stoicism teaches us that this explosion starts long before the eruption. It starts with a spark. Identifying that spark requires full awareness, a kind of consciousness that watches without judgment. For example, when you notice your body reacting, your breath getting short, your fists clenching, stop. Take a deep breath. Literally. 3 conscious breaths are more powerful than 1,000 angry words. That's where self-control comes in, not as repression, but as the freedom to choose. Mastering anger isn't about becoming a Zen robot or pretending nothing affects you. It's about recognizing that while you can't control what happens around you, you can control how you respond. Neuroplasticity shows us that the brain can be trained to respond with calmness instead of reactivity. It's like a muscle. The more you practice, the stronger it gets. A practical exercise. Before responding to a provocation, mentally ask yourself, will this matter a week from now? That simple question activates the prefrontal cortex and quiets the ego. Because more often than not, it's not the situation itself that bothers you. It's wounded pride, unmet expectations, or neglected self-worth. Those who learn to recognize the early signs of anger can get ahead of the chaos. And slowly, that ability turns into wisdom. You begin to realize that not everything deserves a response, that silence is also a powerful choice. That's when self-awareness becomes a loyal ally. Because the more you understand yourself, the less irritated you become with others. Not because others have changed, but because you have. And in the middle of this new mental state, a deeper question begins to rise. Is it really the other person that's bothering me? Or am I just expecting too much? Expectations are like invisible contracts we sign with the world, without telling the world. You expect someone to act a certain way, for things to happen your way, on your timeline. When that doesn't happen, frustration, resentment, and sadness follow. That's when Stoicism delivers a gentle slap. Pain doesn't come from events, but from the judgment we place on them. The key is accepting what is, without the weight of what should be. A practical example? Instead of expecting your partner to magically know you wanted help, communicate. Expecting too much from others is a recipe for disappointment. Lowering expectations isn't pessimism, it's self-care. Many people live in constant conflict not because the world is cruel, but because they idealize too much. They imagine the perfect job, the frictionless relationship, the always available friend. That's the ego shouting that it deserves only the best, all the time. But living with unrealistic expectations is carrying an unnecessary emotional burden. Resilience comes precisely from the ability to deal with what's real, not what's ideal. When you turn down the volume on "I deserve" and turn up the volume on gratitude, life shifts in tone. Gratitude for what is and not just for what you wish it were. That's not resignation, it's wisdom. And what does that have to do with self-control? Because when your expectations aren't met, you tend to react with irritation. Neuroplasticity allows you to reprogram that impulse. Instead of getting frustrated in the bank line, use that time to meditate, review a plan, or simply breathe mindfully. Non-reaction is born when you realize that most of the time it's not the world disappointing you, it's you demanding too much from it. Self-knowledge is the antidote here. The more you understand yourself, the less you expect from others, and the more you expect from yourself. And little by little, the world stops feeling like a battlefield. Most emotional outbursts have a hidden author, the ego. It's vain, needy, and wants applause, even when it hasn't done anything extraordinary. The problem is that when this ego feels threatened, anger shows up like a bodyguard. Stoicism, with its sharp serenity, teaches us how to tame this invisible beast. When someone criticizes us, for example, the ego screams, "What? Do you know who you're talking to?" But what if instead we listened with humility and asked, "Is there something useful in this?" Wisdom lies in filtering what's poison and what's a lesson. Less ego, more growth. Think about it. Have you noticed that the people who get offended the most are often the ones who rely heavily on others' approval? That's not self-esteem. That's disguised neediness. When the ego is in control, any disagreement feels like a personal attack, but self-control allows you to observe the situation clearly without the filter of vanity. This is where self-awareness becomes gold. A helpful exercise is to journal daily about any criticism you received and reflect. Does this hurt my essence or just my pride? Over time, you'll begin to see that most of your irritation was just your ego throwing a tantrum for attention. An inflated ego and unrealistic expectations are a dangerous combo. One wants admiration, the other wants everything to go exactly according to a mental script. Guess what the result is? Anger, resentment, emotional burnout. The cure lies in the consistent practice of humility. And that doesn't mean submission, it means recognizing your limits, accepting that making mistakes is part of the process, and that you won't always be the star of the show. When you remove the ego from the center, you create space for wisdom to step in. And with it comes a question that may sting but transforms. What am I trying to protect with all this anger? Forgiveness isn't a favor you do for the person who hurt you. It's a gift you give yourself. Holding a grudge is like drinking poison and hoping the other person gets sick. The Stoics didn't see forgiveness as weakness, but as a tool for emotional liberation. Because when you don't forgive, it's like you're still chained to the past. And guess what? You're the one carrying the weight. Practicing forgiveness is an act of self-care, a way to reclaim your serenity. Want a practical exercise? Write a forgiveness letter. No need to send it, just write it. You'll be surprised at the relief it brings. A lot of people confuse forgiveness with letting it slide or accepting everything. But forgiving isn't forgetting. It's remembering without pain. It's allowing yourself to rebuild your inner peace without needing the other person's remorse. Neuroplasticity explains that when you forgive, you literally change the way your brain accesses that memory. What once triggered anger begins to trigger compassion. That doesn't mean you should allow further abuse. On the contrary, healthy forgiveness walks hand in hand with firm boundaries. That's where the wisdom comes in. Understanding that forgiving doesn't mean going back. It means moving forward lighter. And here's something curious. The more self-control you develop, the easier it becomes to forgive. Because forgiveness requires emotional maturity. It requires non-reaction. When you understand that the other person acted out of their own limitations, from their own ego, the anger loses its meaning. That doesn't erase your pain, but it transforms your relationship with it. And that transformation gives you space to grow something greater. Gratitude. Gratitude for having overcome, for having learned, for no longer being a prisoner of that wound. And it's in that process that purpose begins to manifest. The purpose of living without being held hostage by the past. Non-reaction might seem at first glance like passivity, but in reality, it's one of the most powerful forms of self-control. Reacting in the heat of the moment is easy. Anyone can do that. The real challenge is to pause, breathe, and choose the best response. That's exactly what Stoicism teaches. Observe without drowning in emotion. It's like being in the middle of a storm, and instead of yelling at the wind, opening an internal umbrella. The practice of non-reaction buys you time. And time, in this case, is the same as wisdom. When someone provokes you, the simple act of waiting 10 seconds before responding already changes the game. In practice, non-reaction can be applied to everyday situations. You know that passive-aggressive comment in the family group chat, or that driver who cut you off in traffic. You can choose not to respond in the moment. And more than that, you can choose not to respond at all. That choice is the result of self-awareness and the understanding that not everything deserves your energy. Filtering what truly matters is a way of protecting your inner peace, and that takes practice. The good news, neuroplasticity allows this self-control to grow stronger with consistency. With each small non-reaction, you become more emotionally resilient. And here's the beautiful part of that process. Non-reaction starts creating inner space. Where there used to be inflated ego and reactivity, now there's peace. This completely transforms your relationship with the world. You stop being controlled by circumstances and start moving with purpose. It's like the silence between stimulus and response becomes fertile ground, and from that soil, wisdom begins to grow. In that silence, self-esteem is born too, because you begin to trust in your own ability not to explode, to choose consciously, to act without being a slave to anger. And that lays the foundation for something even deeper. There's a direct connection between low self-esteem and angry outbursts. When someone doesn't feel secure in themselves, every criticism feels like a threat. Every disagreement feels like an attack. It's as if others' opinions are a fragile mirror that once cracked shatters their internal image. Stoicism teaches that personal value should come from within, not from the outside. When you truly know yourself, your strengths, your limits, your shadows, criticism loses its power to shake you. Anger no longer finds fertile ground. And you know the first step to strengthening that self-esteem? Start keeping the small promises you make to yourself. Practical example, if you decide to wake up at 6 a.m. and get up even when you don't feel like it, you're sending a powerful message to your brain. I am reliable. Over time, that changes everything. Self-esteem grows, the ego quiets down, and self-control strengthens. You stop living in defensive mode and start acting with clarity. When someone confronts you, you no longer feel the need to shout, justify yourself, or prove anything, because you already know who you are. This kind of self-knowledge completely changes the emotional game. And it doesn't come from praise. It comes from daily, silent, sometimes even lonely action, but deeply transformative. As self-esteem strengthens, you learn to distinguish criticism from offense. You understand that you don't have to agree with everything, but you also don't have to react to everything. And that's pure wisdom. Neuroplasticity shows us that the more you train this kind of calm response, the more natural it becomes. And interestingly, the less you need to prove yourself, the more respected you are. Because true confidence attracts respect. And at that point, something even more powerful begins to emerge. The pursuit of a purpose greater than validation. And when that happens, even anger starts to feel like a waste of energy. Living without purpose is like walking in the dark. Every stumble becomes a reason to explode. Frequent irritation often stems from emptiness. When you don't know why you do what you do, everything feels heavy and meaningless. and then any setback becomes the trigger for anger. Stoicism shows us that when we align our actions with a greater purpose, the small frustrations lose their power. You begin to filter what truly deserves your attention, your energy, your response. A clear purpose is like an emotional compass. It guides you even when the storm hits. Without it, you become a passenger of your own impulses. Imagine someone who works purely out of obligation, without feeling connected to what they do. This person will get irritated with the boss, the traffic, the cold coffee. Now compare that with someone who sees their work as part of a mission. This second person, even in the face of the same situations, tends to react with more self-control and gratitude. Not because their life is easier, but because they have a strong enough why. That's purpose. And purpose doesn't need to be something grand. It can be something simple, like serving, learning, growing, caring. What matters is that it makes sense to you, that it pulls you forward with resilience. The search for purpose requires self-awareness. And the more you know yourself, the more you understand what irritates you and why. Often, anger is just a cry from the emptiness. Give me a reason to keep going. And when that reason appears, arguments lose their importance, the ego quiets, and self-control becomes more natural. It's as if the mind creates a new hierarchy. What moves you starts to matter more than what bothers you. And when you find that state, you realize that the neuroplasticity of your mind is already at work. But then comes the challenge. How do you maintain this clarity when everything seems to be falling apart? Few people know. But the brain is like clay. It molds itself according to repeated habits and thoughts. Neuroplasticity is the scientific proof that you can indeed transform. This includes changing how you deal with anger. That automatic impulse to explode, shout, slam the door. It's not a personality sentence, it's mental programming. And if it was learned, it can be reprogrammed. Stoicism was already saying this centuries before science proved it. And this reprogramming starts with the repetition of new patterns, breathing deeply instead of reacting, observing before responding, reflecting before acting. Want a practical example? During the next week, every time you feel irritation rising, place your hand on your chest and count to 5. It seems too simple, right? But this small gesture creates a new neural circuit. The brain understands that there is another possible path. Over time, you'll notice that the irritation that once seemed inevitable begins to fade. This is neuroplasticity in action. And to speed up the process, it's helpful to include practices like meditation, reflective writing, and even visualization. Imagining yourself responding calmly already trains the brain. This is about building, with patience, a new version of yourself. It's interesting to realize that this brain change not only reduces anger, but also strengthens self-esteem. You start to see yourself as someone who can choose, not just react, and that changes everything. Suddenly, situations that once threw you off balance become opportunities for practice, almost like challenges in the video game of life. Each victory over anger fuels your self-control, and this silently feeds a deep wisdom. But how do you maintain this new pattern when the world insists on poking at your weak points? The answer may be simpler than it seems. Few things disarm anger as quickly as a sincere moment of gratitude. When the heart is full of appreciation, there's no room for anger. It's like trying to start a fire in a wet field. The spark simply doesn't catch. Stoicism values this practice not as a self-help cliché, but as a real emotional self-control strategy. Cultivating gratitude is a way to redirect your focus from what's missing to what exists, from the offense to the lesson. A good daily exercise is to write down 3 things you're grateful for. They don't have to be grand. It could be the quiet of the morning or the warm coffee. And love. Our love is revolutionary. Not the romantic, idealized love, but the love that understands, that embraces, that sees the other as human, flawed, just like you. When someone hurts you, Your natural impulse may be to retaliate, but if you can take a deep breath and see the pain behind the attack, something changes. You stop acting on impulse and start responding with purpose. This is non-reaction. It's self-awareness in practice. It's emotional neuroplasticity. Love in this context is not weakness. It's concentrated strength. It's applied wisdom. Gratitude and love create an inner field where irritation can't find a home. And mind you, this doesn't mean becoming someone who accepts everything in silence. It means having clarity about what deserves a response and what deserves compassion. When you develop this perspective, your self-esteem grows because you realize you no longer need to defend yourself all the time. This creates a state of presence, lightness, and even humor. Because in the end, some things that used to drive you crazy now seem simply funny. And this prepares you for the next step, learning to protect this peace with well-defined boundaries. Boundaries are not walls to push others away. They are bridges that protect what's essential in you. Those who don't set boundaries end up giving until they dry up, and when they realize it, irritation becomes routine. Stoicism teaches that self-control also involves knowing when to say no. This is self-awareness in action. Saying no isn't being rude, it's being clear. It's understanding that your energy is valuable and that not every invitation, problem, or others' need deserves an immediate response. If you get irritated easily, perhaps you're not angry at others, but at yourself for not respecting yourself. Practical example: if someone calls you outside of work hours, demanding something urgent while you're resting, it's completely healthy to respond, "I can't right now, can we talk tomorrow?" It seems simple, but for many people this is almost impossible. Why? Because the ego wants to be accepted, wants to please, wants to maintain the image of being always available. But this comes at a high cost: emotional exhaustion, loss of self-esteem, and of course, accumulated anger. Well-set boundaries are signs of emotional maturity. They show that you take care of yourself, and those who take care of themselves teach the world how they should be treated. When you learn to set boundaries with love and firmness, you begin to notice how this directly impacts your peace. Provocations decrease, expectations adjust, and the ego quiets down. You become the owner of your time, your space, your reactions. And this gives you the strength to continue living with purpose, without carrying the weight of others on your shoulders. And the most interesting part? Those who truly respect you will admire your boundaries. Those who don't, well, they may have never valued you properly in the first place. But how can you discern what's worth allowing and what needs to be ignored? The truth is, you don't need to react to everything, and not everything deserves your energy. The world is constantly trying to steal your attention with cheap provocations, gossip, passive-aggressive comments, and mean remarks. But those who keep reacting to every little external thing will never find inner peace. Stoicism teaches filter. Wisely filter what deserves your response and what only deserves silence. This is high-level self-control, because, let's be honest, some fights shouldn't even start. A sideways glance, a passive-aggressive comment, sometimes ignoring it is the greatest sign of strength. Filtering what matters is also an exercise in self-esteem. Those who know their worth don't feel the need to prove themselves all the time. The ego wants to respond, retort, win arguments, but wisdom wants to preserve peace. A good exercise is to ask yourself, will this impact my life a month from now, a year from now? If the answer is no, then why waste energy on it now? Neuroplasticity helps in this process. The more you train yourself to ignore what's irrelevant, the more natural it becomes. And this isn't avoidance, it's focus. Focus on what truly matters: your well-being, your growth, your purpose. When you start choosing your battles consciously, life changes tone. It's like adjusting the emotional volume: less external noise, more internal clarity. And this brings almost immediate relief. There's more time, more energy, more peace. And when peace remains, There's room for gratitude, compassion, and resilience. It's like your mind becomes clearer, lighter, and in this new inner space, it becomes easier to distinguish what is fact and what is just a story created by your mind. A large part of human suffering doesn't come from what happens, but from what we believe that event means. The mind has a habit of turning simple facts into complex narratives. A delay becomes disrespect, a glance becomes contempt, silence becomes rejection. But is that really the case? Stoicism invites us to separate what is fact, neutral and objective, from the interpretation our anxious ego adds on top. And this simple act can change everything. Because when you train this separation, irritation loses its power, and in its place, self-control, serenity, and wisdom step in. Want a practical example? Someone views your message and doesn't respond. The fact is, the message was viewed and there was no response. That's it. Everything else, this person is ignoring me. They don't care about me. They're disrespecting me. Are beliefs your mind created. They aren't facts. And living based on distorted beliefs fuels anger, insecurity, and resentment. Neuroplasticity shows that it's possible to re-educate this mental pattern. The key is to train observation without judgment, to notice what's happening without labeling it. This is emotional freedom. This is self-awareness. When you learn to see reality more clearly, you realize that many of your reactions were directed at ghosts created by your own mind. Ghosts made of expectations, fear, low self-esteem. But by separating what's real from what's interpreted, you regain power over your reaction. And this transforms your relationships, your mood, and your energy. You become less reactive, more present, less impulsive, more wise. And in this new state of awareness, a new question arises. How do I see myself when no one is watching? The way you see yourself defines how you react to the world. If your self-image is fragile, any criticism sounds like a threat. But when you build a solid, healthy vision of who you are, attacks lose their impact. Stoicism teaches that true freedom is born when you stop shaping yourself to please others and start living according to your principles. This is living with purpose. A healthy self-image isn't about thinking you're perfect, but about accepting yourself as a whole, virtues, flaws, limits. It's looking in the mirror and saying, I am enough. That generates true self-esteem, not the inflated kind created by the ego. A simple and powerful exercise: write down on a piece of paper who I am and answer without using any external labels. No profession, no title, no appearance, just essence. This helps deconstruct the idea that your value depends on social validation. And you know what happens when you stop seeking approval all the time? You get less irritated, because you no longer need to prove anything to anyone. This is emotional self-control. This is practical wisdom. Neuroplasticity works the magic of transforming this new view of yourself into a new way of existing in the world. With a healthy self-image, you filter relationships better, choose more consciously where to set your boundaries, and respond to criticism with discernment. The person who truly knows themselves isn't shaken by anyone's opinion. They listen, reflect, and if it makes sense, they adjust. If not, they move on peacefully. This type of serenity is a shield against anger. It's the manifestation of self-knowledge in the form of behavior. But what if the problem isn't in how you see yourself, but in how you see others? One of the biggest emotional mistakes is expecting perfection from others, thinking that those who wrong you are bad and those who do right are good. But the reality is much more complex. We are all light and shadow, successes and stumbles. Stoicism teaches us to see the human being as a whole without reducing them to a single action or attitude. When you understand that even the people closest to you will fail, not out of malice but out of limitation, anger loses its place. This is wisdom applied to relationships. After all, Expecting others to always be reasonable is, at its core, an expectation disguised as judgment. A practical example: someone in your family makes a serious mistake. You can react with anger and cut ties, or you can look deeper and try to understand what led that person to act this way. This doesn't mean accepting everything. It means separating the action from the essence. People hurt others because they are also hurt. This isn't an excuse, it's understanding. The practice of forgiveness begins when you see that the other person is also fighting internal battles. And when you activate this more compassionate perspective, the ego lowers its guard, neuroplasticity helps you react differently, and peace begins to grow. Seeing the humanity in others is also seeing your own humanity. It's accepting that no one will always get it right, not even you. And that's okay. This understanding lightens the weight of relationships and softens reactions. When someone disappoints you, instead of exploding, try breathing and asking yourself, if I were in that person's shoes, with the same story, would I have acted differently? Maybe yes, maybe no. But just that pause changes everything. This is non-reaction, it's resilience, it's purpose applied to relationships. And in this process of observation, you might discover a new way to handle your own anger when it arises. RIN is a simple but powerful acronym: recognize, investigate, nurture. A technique that combines Stoicism with mindfulness practices and neuroscience. First, recognize, identify that anger is present, without trying to shove it under the rug. This requires presence and honesty. I'm angry. My body is tense. My mind is racing. Just this recognition already shifts the emotional state, because what is seen clearly can be transformed. Ignoring anger only makes it grow inside, silently, and anything that grows uncontrollably will explode. Then comes the investigation. Why did this anger arise? What triggered it? Was it the other person's tone of voice, an unmet expectation, a wounded ego? This stage is a deep dive into self-awareness, and there's no right answer. There's only sincerity. Investigating is looking courageously at yourself without judgment. It's realizing if what truly irritated you was what happened or what you believed that event meant. This is where neuroplasticity comes in. By investigating frequently, you train your brain to react with more clarity and less impulse. This is where wisdom is born. Finally, the nurturing, offering compassion to the wounded part of yourself. Instead of criticizing yourself for feeling anger, embrace it. Tell yourself, it's understandable to feel this way, but I can choose a different way to act. This strengthens self-esteem, self-control, and breaks the cycle of guilt and repression. Nurturing is an act of self-love, of internal care, and this completely transforms your relationship with anger, because when anger is neither denied nor fueled, it dissolves. And in its place, gratitude is born, for being aware, alive, and constantly evolving. Now that you know the Stoic secret to never getting angry with anyone again, what will you do with this power? Will you continue blaming others for your reactions, or will you take control and transform your emotions into a fortress? Because in the end, knowing doesn't change anything. What changes is applying. And if you've made it this far, you're already at a level above the average. The question is, will you live like those who react to everything, or like those who master themselves? Have you ever stopped to think about how your life would be if anger no longer dominated you? How would your relationships, your decisions, your sleep be? What was the strongest insight you had watching this video? Comment below. I want to know what flipped the switch for you. And of course, if this content helped you in any way, made you think, feel, or act differently, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and join us on this journey of self-mastery, wisdom, and inner peace. Because this is just the beginning.